Welcome, everyone. You're listening to School of Block, a Canadian blockchain, Bitcoin, and cryptocurrency podcast that breaks it all down for newbies. I'm Adam, your host.
And I'm Steph, your newbie. We're bringing it back to the basics. You're going to learn what blockchain is, how it's used, and why it's so important to the future of our economy. There are no dumb questions. Our goal is to bring crypto knowledge to the masses while making it easy to understand as possible.
You're going to follow Steph on her journey of knowing nothing about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, and blockchain to being an expert in the field.
Well, we'll see.
Okay, so today we're going to be talking about Ethereum, known in some circles as Bitcoin's most successful rival. So what is Ethereum and Ether? How does it work, and where did it come from? Those are just a few of the questions that we're going to cover on today's episode.
Wasn't it started in Canada?
That's right, Steph. And we also have a special guest today to help us get through the thick of it. And by the end of the episode, you'll have a basic foundation for understanding how technologies like Ethereum are changing our world. So before we get started, I would like to introduce a very special guest, Amir Rosic. Amir Rosic is a serial entrepreneur, marketing expert, investor, and blockchain evangelist as the CEO of Blockgeeks, Inc., a premier blockchain training technology educational platform whose sole mission is to share and grow the knowledge around blockchain technology. Amir is also a regular panelist and has spoken about blockchain at Mars and Western University. As well as being a respected blogger in the blockchain field, he has also appeared as a speaker on sites like VentureBeat, HuffPo, The Next Web, and Engadget. Welcome to the show, Amir. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me here.
Impressive experience. I didn't even know we were getting a podcast host, so this is really exciting.
All right, so let's talk Ethereum and Ether. For those of you who don't know, Ethereum is an open source distributed computing platform and operating system featuring smart contract functionality. Ether is the cryptocurrency for operation of Ethereum, which provides a public distributed ledger for transactions.
That sounds like quite a mouthful. Do you have a layman's term for that?
Well, maybe Amir can help us get started here. I think a great way to dissect this rather than defining each component is to start with the purpose, let's say in comparison to Bitcoin. So if Bitcoin is a decentralized peer-to-peer payment network and digital currency, how does that differ from Ethereum?
It's a good question. Most people try to compare those two together. I view them as completely separate. In one camp, as you mentioned, you have Bitcoin. In my mind, I view it as sound money, a means of commerce between one person, peer-to-peer, without any center person telling me I can or can't do this. But when you look at Ethereum, and originally why Vitalik created Ethereum was for an open source world, actually their words are world computer, creating a smart contract platform or virtual machine where people can create programmable online contracts that have their own currencies involved into it. So think of it more as a global computer where people can create their own currency and utilize within their own economy.
Okay, that makes great bit of sense. So it's more like an ecosystem to allow this type of informational exchange to run. I like to give analogies, even though most people in the crypto space will butcher me for this, but I like analogies. It gives pictures in people's minds and stories. Imagine if Linux had its own token. Right? Okay. The Linux was the biggest, it still is the biggest open source project on the planet. Absolutely.
Imagine if it had its own token and it could have created its own economy within Linux. That's what Ethereum is today. That's actually a great analogy. I've never looked at it like that, and that begins to make a lot more sense in comparison to the global computer virtual machine analysis. I really liked when it first sort of came about that you can think of it as the world computer. So to sort of break it down for Steph, let's just say that you need a whole bunch of computing power to run an application, but the servers or computers that you're going to potentially use are either too expensive, non-efficient, not as trustworthy. So now there's an alternative, and I'm guessing that's kind of what the Ethereum virtual computer does. With smart contracts, it's nothing new. It wasn't like Vitalik invented smart contract. Right. We have it in the white paper. Nick Szabo, one of the founders of smart contracts. If you guys are familiar with like a vending machine, right? You put in a quarter, you type in like B9, then you get your Snickers bar. Yep. Those are smart contracts. But imagine that virtually speaking, right? It's the rule, if this, then that, right? And so right now, traditionally, like let's say I want to do a bank transfer. I got to physically go in the bank and be like, oh, here's my SWIFT number, here's this, here's that. They're trusting a third party. So the bank doesn't even do your wire transfer.
Right.
They trust a third party. The third party holds your money. They spend, 72 hours to take their clip off of the percentage, which is outrageous. And half the time they screw up. Just the other day they screwed up another wire transfer of mine, and now I got to go back in physically and see what went wrong, et cetera, et cetera. Now imagine we remove this middleman, this person responsible for transferring money from point A to point B. Now let's talk about a simple transaction that we can do. I want to, say, buy a car, right? Instead of me entrusting an escrow to buy the car has its ownership on the blockchain. And I can go, okay, there's a Tesla for sale. I want to buy it. I send some Ether or whatever currency they are selling it for. And then the smart contract gets activated. And through that smart contract, the ownership can be transferred, money can be transferred, and all the necessary, both financial and legalities necessary in a purchase of the car will be done through the smart contract.
Would you say it's a safer way to then transfer funds from one entity to another?
To be brutally honest with you, currently today, no.
Okay.
It's not safer.
So it's almost like a way to digitally enforce the execution of a contract, if you will. So if you and I drop a contract to do some sort of a project, and there's when this happens, then this happens, and so on and so forth. So basically a smart contract can digitize that process in some fashion, depending on what we're building.
I'll give you a real world example that we're utilizing. We also have another side platform called Bounty One.
Okay.
We do free hackathons, online hackathons for companies.
Oh, right on.
And so that's run on a smart contract platform. So traditionally speaking, how a hackathon would be, like, let's say, or even like a freelancing website like Upwork or freelancing.com traditionally is you would upload your money via PayPal or Visa in their escrow, and once everything is satisfied from both parties, that escrow would be open and the person that did the work would receive the money. Instead, we have a smart contract for online hackathons where I, as a company, come along. I'm like, hey guys, I want you to do X, Y, and Z for this hackathon. Here's $1,000. It's in a smart contract in crypto. And as soon as I'm satisfied with the hackathon, that money is automatically then released. But what's cool about it is it doesn't have to be released to one person. We can have variables and stipulations inside of it. Be like, if somebody does this much work, that much work, whatever these clauses, like any other legal contract that we have in the real world, it can then be divided, like 80% to this guy, 10% to that guy, 5% to that guy, and like 2% over here.
And you thought I was passionate about crypto. So let's move on to a couple of other topics. So this is kind of a hard one to tackle. I mean, we just tried to basically define its purpose, but let's sort of take it down to maybe a specific piece of functionality that Ethereum offers. So I mean, maybe we'll just stick with the smart contract for a minute. What would you say traditional, other than the analogies we just used, what are the traditional problems that it would solve, let's say, in everyday use case? So for large institutions, for schools, for governments, what is the main problem solver? Would it be the removal of human imperfection?
Ideally for me, smart contracts, they can eliminate a lot of the bureaucratic, repeatable tasks that we see in governments. For me, I'm not anti-government. I just believe government must be reduced for efficiencies. I'm big on efficiencies. And so the whole purpose of society the whole purpose is we should make a better society for everybody. More prosperity, more health, more safety, more everything, right? We want to live better. And majority of the time, 90% of these jobs in the government is literally taking data from point A to point B, right? And
there's a lot more than A and B. It's like A to Z.
Yeah, yeah. And so, with a blockchain such as Ethereum and many others out there, we could theoretically replace a lot of these tasks that require data from point A to point B and replace it on a ledger or replace it with smart contracts. And this process can make it more transparent as well. Like, one thing is, even though I believe a lot of our tax, I'm a libertarian, I don't like labels, but that's the closest thing, to my belief system is I believe taxes are theft. However, I would be much more inclined to pay taxes if I had 100% transparency. If I saw exactly where my money went, how it's spent, why is it spent that way, and efficiencies. I want the government to be efficient, but that's an oxymoron.
I would agree with you, and I would agree with you. I think that was very well said. I think one thing I do notice, I mean, even looking at the local level, for example, in the city of Toronto where we are here, take, for example, parking tickets. You know, if any of our listeners have ever tried to pay a parking ticket in Toronto past the date that you can do it online, it's a very cumbersome process, and it really boils down to what Amir was just talking about, which is large bureaucracy, moving, you know, very...
Don't worry, 5 years from now with the self-driving cars, no more paid parking tickets.
No more
parking tickets, period.
Oh, that'll be the day.
Hallelujah.
So let's talk about what the difference is between Ether, the token, and Ethereum, the platform.
Sure.
Usually a lot of people use it interchangeably. When they are talking about the token, they'll mention Ethereum. But let's maybe take a little stab at what the main difference is.
Sure. So you have Ethereum, which is the decentralized platform, right? The technology. It's the blockchain itself, right? Just like Bitcoin, you have Bitcoin blockchain,
correct,
and Bitcoin is the cryptocurrency within its blockchain,
right?
And so you have Ethereum, which is a blockchain, and you have Ether, which is responsible for multiple features. Ether is responsible for as a crypto within Ethereum,
right?
It's responsible for security because every single transaction that you do in Ethereum has to be done through gas,
right?
Which I don't want to get into, right? But let's just say that Ether is responsible for security models. In the future now, Ethereum is switching to a new type of model, different than Bitcoin. I won't get into that because that's kind of technical. And Ethereum will be the most important element within, Ether will be the most important element within Ethereum. So this future version of Ethereum, maybe within the next 6 months or a year, I'm not too sure for the timeline, Ethereum will not exist without Ether. And so this is kind of like a test I do. I know I'm kind of jumping around where ICOs, where I actually ask them, I'm like, hey, if I take your token out of your platform, can I still use it? And 99% of the time they come back with yes. I'm like, what's the point of your token?
Right. It's supposed to be used inside the ecosystem.
That's right.
Right. So that's very interesting. It's probably pretty clear to our listeners who have followed us from the first episode that this is really a next level or advanced level or the next step, if you will, in the evolution of blockchain technologies.
Yeah, there's so many coming out there. You have like DEGs, you have these like ledgerless ledgers, you have now these delegated proof of stakes in EOS.
Now that's an oxymoron, a ledgerless ledger.
Tell me about it.
So what would you say, while staying on the topic probably about tokens for a moment, what would you say are some of the top ICOs or tokens with a really practical idea that is either in the works or being developed? So some of the most notable ICOs, I would imagine.
I think for an actual token that helps its users, that's pretty functional within the ecosystem, would be Binance.
Okay.
You actually get paid back certain, well, I'll call it dividends, but it's not dividends, right? Cash flow generated by Binance. Okay. It's very fascinating. I think the governance and voting tokens are fascinating.
Those have always been my favorite, especially sort of aligning with you with a lot of libertarian values. I believe that this one-way mathematics will really help to protect all of us going forward if we implement it the right way. That's why I applaud you so much for your work at Blockgeeks. I mean, that is only necessary for the evolution of this industry to progress.
We're super early right now. Like people talking about, if you look at the Gartner hype cycle, it's kind of like a roller coaster, up and down. We're going to go through multiple cycles like that. I don't like to have analogies or comparisons, but if we're looking at comparing timelines, we're like at the Netscape time right now,
right,
for blockchain. We're still experimenting what's going on. The end factor, though, is like there's money involved, right? And money changes people.
Of course.
Either makes you a more awesome person. People say like, oh, that guy really changed, or that girl really changed with money. I'm like, no, that person was always a jackass. Now he's a super jackass,
correct,
right?
Right.
And so you have this end factor, which you have money involved, liquid money, big different than equity. And so it changes human behaviors and dynamics of the ecosystem. But what's fascinating about this ecosystem, this whole industry, is like it's global. I believe that Asia will be the massive adopter of blockchain and crypto compared to North America because people just don't see the value in it over here. And so I think we will see nation states apply cryptocurrencies as their national currency. I think China will be the first country in the world. They've been experimenting with taking the renminbi, their national currency, and putting it on the blockchain. So there is a dark side to the blockchain, right? Imagine if a government tells you, okay, no more cash, and there is a war on cash. Look at what's happening in India. Almost every single year, they're canceling certain notes. Modi's doing that.
I go to the corner store here, and I pull out a 50 or 100, and they go, do you have debit?
Exactly.
And I it's funny because 10, 15 years ago, it's like you pull out a debit card and they go, do you have cash?
Yep. Now imagine if you're forced to use a government cryptocurrency where they can literally track every single transaction that you do. And that's going to happen.
That's scary.
Absolutely. So this is a very in-depth conversation. Let's sort of end off this first segment here. What would be sort of the let's say if we wanted to explain the notoriety behind Ethereum. So maybe that might involve a significant event in Ethereum's history, or whether it was a response to some industry event. Maybe
Vitalik, he's been in the Bitcoin industry. Quick note, he's originally from Toronto. He's my business partner's son.
Vitalik would be one of the gods,
if
you will.
Yeah, and so he's been working on that in a while in Bitcoin, and then for the longest period of time, he was trying to figure out, how do you evolve the protocol, because they don't have smart contracts on Bitcoin, right? They have UTXOs. And so I would say the most pivotal point for Ethereum was their initial ICO they did, right? He went down to, I think it was 2014, down to Miami.
Yeah, it was 50 cents offering, correct?
Yeah,
Something
and they ended up raising at that time was like 30 million, around that mark. They raised $30 million, but that was like the world's first real successful, and I would still say the most successful ICO of all time. Right. And that was their pivotal, I think, point in time. The second pivotal point in time, I don't think so. There would be the DAO.
The DAO.
That's right.
And that's gonna sort of lead me into one of the next things I want to talk about. I mean, the result of that happening is Ethereum Classic.
Yes.
So let's just briefly explain to the audience, what is Ethereum and what is Ethereum Classic?
All right.
It's my favorite.
One
of my favorites.
Because we got Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash.
Correct.
Before we do that, can we just talk about Ether, the token, and Ethereum? So is Ether always in the Ethereum, or
it's baked in?
Okay, it's baked in.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's if I'm correct, it's a requirement in order to anything that's built on the Ethereum blockchain, for example, like a smart contract or a decentralized application. It requires, you had alluded to this earlier, gas. So Ethereum is used to almost fuel the interaction of these.
Yeah, it's used for staking. It's used for security models. It's used as payment channels within Ethereum. Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting. So back to sort of what we were going to get at a moment ago with the DAO fork and Ethereum Classic. This fits very well with the history of Ethereum. So let's talk about a little bit about that. Actually, and maybe before we talk about Ethereum Classic, let's tell people what the DAO fork was, which leads to Ethereum Classic.
Yeah, let's first talk about forks.
Forks.
What is a fork? Okay.
Well, I have a spoon and a knife over here.
That's right.
But I'm not sure.
So basically, okay, so if we're talking about like Bitcoin and Ethereum, these are open source projects.
Okay.
Meaning nobody theoretically owns them. There's no CEO, CMO. There's nobody that has a patent saying, well, I have the code. You can't see the code. Any of us can go on GitHub and go onto their repository and read their code. And go on their website, read everything. It's public for everybody. But with these public networks, that means anyone can do anything with the code. Absolutely anything. And so there's nothing stopping all of us here in this room together to go to Bitcoin or Ethereum and be like, hey guys, we will copy this code and fork it. Meaning we'll make our own variation of this code, and we're going to have support of miners, we're going to have support of exchanges, and we're all going to agree in a consensus that this is our new version of whatever, Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash Plus. And so
Bitcoin Gold,
right? I always a funny joke is like, we're going to fork from Bitcoin to Bitcoin Cash, and someone's going to fork to cash, and then we'll go back to fiat.
That's a good one.
Yeah. And so the DAO was interesting. The DAO was like, it was painted as code is law, and no one can mess with code. And we created this immutable, I would call it like in quotations, a decentralized VC firm online, where people all around the world put in money, but it was coded really, really bad. And so basically people say it got hacked. It never got hacked. That's a misconception. It was coded so badly that somebody just found a back door. Like, hey, thanks guys. And then what's crazy about it, you can, in real time, you're watching your money drain from these contracts. And you mentioned earlier, are smart contracts safe?
Yeah.
And I'm being honest with you, currently, no. I would say 50% of all and we do this at Blockgeeks.
But this is down to implementation, not necessarily the underlying...
This is just sloppiness.
Wow.
Point blank sloppiness.
It's like telling people when they go, oh, you explain to them, talk about Bitcoin, and, one of the most mainstream facts about Bitcoin is Mt. Gox. Mm-hmm. And, somebody stole it or Bitcoin was hacked. And, if you recall that, Bitcoin wasn't hacked at all. It was a singular actor, if you will, a company that didn't do things correctly.
That's right.
And that's really all it was. So essentially the DAO situation is effectively
like that. Example. Yeah, it was really... It was rushed out so much, and at the end of that, Ethereum is still in its infancy right now. Imagine it just came out and they decided to do this, right? And then so at that point in time, I think maybe 10% of total supply was in Ethereum. Mm-hmm. And so they're having a dilemma because they said, wait a second, code is law. And that's it. You can't really do much. You've lost 10% of total supply. And this guy that found the back door, he's taking I don't know, it was $300 million he's taking from Ethereum. And so the whole community around the world is trying to figure out what to do, what's the consensus. Should we erase it? Should we reverse back in time? And there's two different camps. One camp is no, a blockchain should be immutable. No one can go back, and defeats the whole purpose of a blockchain. But then, the community decided, and what I mean by decided, the miners decided, the exchange decided to fork. And so Ethereum, since it's open source, as I mentioned at the beginning, it said, okay, we're going to create a new blockchain, a new track, which doesn't omit what happened with the DAO. So that DAO hack, in quotation.
And it was really just a theft.
Yes. It was a theft.
Yeah, it was a theft.
It wasn't a yeah, exactly. Right. And so some people are like, well, no, we want code to be law. We want to stick with the original promise of Ethereum, and hence why we have two Ethereums. We have the original, which is Ethereum Classic, and then we have the Ethereum today, which is ETH.
So I always get into this dilemma when explaining Ethereum and Ethereum Classic when I say that Ethereum Classic is the continuation of the original chain. But it's actually not the original per se, given that its inventors are managing and maintaining the new chain, which is Ethereum, which was the first.
But the interesting thing about Ethereum that's different from Bitcoin, they actually have, within their community, they do have discussions of planned forks.
Right.
So this isn't Ethereum's more of a let's make and break it, experiment as fast as possible, as opposed to Bitcoin is cypherpunk, solid sound money. We're dealing with billions.
Don't ever touch it. It's good as it is.
Exactly.
Right. I look at Ethereum Classic and I really... I kind of understand that philosophy. It's almost the Bitcoin argument.
Yeah. But remember, anyone can do it. You and I can go right now to Ethereum Classic and make Ethereum 0.
Right.
We can fork it.
Right.
As long as we have support from miners, people are like, we'll give you hash power. We'll give you computation power.
And theoretically, we could do that component ourselves.
Yes.
I mean, it would be...
Well, this is why you see all these forks of Bitcoin today. Bitcoin Gold, Bitcoin Private, Bitcoin this, Bitcoin that, yada, yada, yada.
Right. It's a race to grab. Interesting. So,
Makes sense. This podcast is brought to you by Blockgeeks, the world's premier blockchain education platform, and Bitbuy.ca, Canada's trusted choice for buying and selling cryptocurrency. Bitbuy.ca has been selling Ethereum since 2014, so choose Bitbuy.ca.
Welcome back. Before the break, we gave you a brief rundown on what Ethereum is and its history. So let's get to the meat and potatoes.
So I'm very curious about ICOs. So what is an ICO and what are some of the practical uses of Ethereum?
So let me try and take a stab at this. An ICO, or initial coin offering, is sort of an alternative to a stock market IPO. Am I correct in that comparison?
I'd say no.
Well, that's why we have the professor here, and meat and potatoes is being served up for dinner.
Yeah, so ICOs are interesting. They stand for initial coin offering.
I got that part right.
Yeah, exactly. And so we talk about Ethereum and we talk about, what are the use cases for it, and we're still trying to flush out these use cases. But currently today, the most applied use case for Ethereum is ICOs. Like, people are raising money on the Ethereum platform. And so they're creating their own token on the Ethereum platform and raising money. The difference, though, is, like you mentioned, IPO, right? IPO, it goes through different stages. Most likely the company's been around for a minimum 10 years. They have a good EBITDA, or sometimes they don't, but they're generating revenue. They're selling a profit. And when they go to the public markets, you and I, as shareholders within this company, we own equity, right? Mm-hmm. Now, in an ICO, they mint their own token. It's like, all right, guys, we're going to program. That's why it's called programmable money. Mm-hmm. So they go to Ethereum, and literally we can do it in 5 minutes. Like, if I have my laptop here, you and I can do an ICO in 5 minutes right now. And like, okay, we're going to call this, the ABC token. And basically, like, we tell people to buy our ABC token. We can say one token is worth whatever, X Ethereum. Mm-hmm. We can make our own pricing, and people buy it. The difference is you don't own equity, you don't own dividends, you don't own rights, you don't own anything per se. You literally own coding language that someone created that took them 5 minutes. And so people view this as very bad. Some people view this as very good. I view it as, I think it's a necessary process in the evolution within our space. I'm very pessimistic short term when it comes to ICOs, but very optimistic long term. I think they're an amazing vehicle for future fundraising. It democratizes accessibility, because if you really look at Silicon Valley, it's not like the most best and brightest brains are there. It's not like that. There are no doubtly, amazing human beings there, but it's the small circle of capital that people have access to. And so now, like, at Ethereum, Vitalik went down to the Bitcoin Miami conference. He went here and there, and he raised money from Bitcoiners back in the day. And these ICOs have raised, a couple of $1 billion in the last year. So they've raised it globally. And so ICOs, for the most part, they're an amazing new vehicle. I just think currently how it's done, it's not the best approach. And so I think we have a very, very long way to go. We need to first see the blockchain tech itself evolve and mature to functionalities that can handle millions of users, both from a scalable and secure aspect, and also from the ICO aspect, seeing how does this look like in the future? Are we raising a token that represents equity, which for me, it's not really sexy. Mm-hmm. I care about, are we raising a token for governance? Are we raising a token for cash flow generating dividends? Like, all these new models that are non-existent today. If we're just trying to replace the status quo, that's why people are talking about security tokens. I'm like, it defeats the purpose of why this technology exists in the first place. Right. So short-term pessimistic, but long-term very optimistic.
So how would that compare to a Kickstarter campaign, for instance?
It's a good question. One with Kickstarter, you're not actually selling off any quote unquote value. So what I mean by value is when people have an ICO, for the most part, they're promising a return in value, right? And so that's why people get confused whether it's equity or some shares. Is like, okay, you're buying this token for X. Let's call X $1. You as an investor, in quotation, you psychologically want a return, or else why you're giving them money. You're not expecting a product back, like from Kickstarter. Like if you do a Kickstarter, I did a Kickstarter, one of my businesses, we sold underwear. Right. My other friend sold a book, etc.
So the investors got your first underwear.
Yeah, they got a tangible product. But in the ICO, there is no tangible product. Most people, what they're doing is like, I want to buy the token for X and I want to wait till it increases, get an arbitrage and sell for Y. Yeah. And so this is where the issue comes into play, because if you and I invested in a regular company, in a startup, we would get equity, we would get voting rights, it would be tied up, it's attached to hopefully it's attached to a good business model that makes sense, right? And so this is why I said that ICO short term, I think they're just garbage. Yeah. But long term, I think they're an amazing vehicle.
So would you say that, sort of given maybe where your philosophy is on that regulation laws surrounding offering financial products or financial derivatives. Do you think that because there's a lack of oversight, guidance, or regulation in the ICO realm that these problems are manifested? So, for example, with the analogy you just gave about buying a stock, you end up holding equity in that company, and you may get a dividend, or you may have royalties, depending on whatever the term of the investment you did. But you have something for that, where you don't really have in an ICO. So some of the protection for the investor in that part is that the IPO offerings or stock offerings go through a very specific set of compliance requirements. I mean, I filled out an accredited investor sheet many times, and you have to pass the bar because you really don't know what you're getting if you're not educated. So would it be safe to say that even more of that plagues the ICO space? That there really is also a huge lack of understanding about investing in general, and so because there's minimal barriers to entry in crypto ICO investing, the everyman can't just go buy $5,000 worth of stock where the participation requires an accredited status.
I would say yes and no. In fact, I would say the majority of the people who are funding these ICOs are intelligent investors. They're the whales.
Right.
And so they see massive opportunity. So they're coming in, getting ridiculous discounts on tokens because they have instant liquidity maybe within the next month or two.
Right.
And they're dumping on the public markets. Right. So it's not like the public is getting allocation of 10 to 15%. Because A, they don't even have the capital. You're not. Yeah. It's not like a regular guy's walking around with $5-10 million. So you have these.
That's accredited level.
Yeah. Right. And so you have these OG whale groups in the crypto space, or even VC firms and a lot of hedge funds that I know in the space. They're coming in because, for example, a hedge fund. Liquidity is the name of the game for them, right? So if they see the optionality of, I can get 25% discount on this token, put in a milli, and I know for a fact that it might go up 20x within the next 3 months, like, it'd be crazy not to do it, right?
So it's like private placement on already public stuff.
Well, it's a greater fool theory. You got to find the next schmuck to buy.
Right. So a lot has to be hashed out.
What is your actual business model?
Right.
Right. What is your business model? How are you using your token? How am I protected? How is it locked? How is it vested? Et cetera, et cetera.
And even, are you real? I mean, how many of these white papers are literally napkins? So one of the next things I kind of want to talk about, which is probably one step past smart contracts and ICOs for Ethereum, is DApps, or Decentralized Applications. So just briefly, maybe let's just talk about what a DApp is, and maybe give an example of a successful one.
And that's a good question.
CryptoKitties.
Successful for 24 hours.
That's correct. Where's my Steph Curry CryptoKitty?
That's right. DApp, so Decentralized Applications. Short term, like I said, I'm very pessimistic on dApps. Long term, they have some interesting use cases. I think they're oversold, to tell you the truth, for the most part. So original app is, you have an app, you put it on Amazon, you put it on Azure, you put it on whatever central server, and you put it on the iStore, you put it on Google, and you're good to go, right? The whole aspect of a decentralized application is you run it on Ethereum, or you can run it on any of these other blockchains, and you have to run it on their decentralized nodes. You have to use your own token. You have to use their security protocols. So it's very slow. It's not scalable, and
that's a network problem.
It's a network problem, but it's also use cases, right? You're going to ask yourself with these dApps, like, why do I need a decentralized Amazon?
Right.
I love Amazon. Like, I used to have my other business on Amazon as an entrepreneur, right? Amazon does all my credit card checks. Amazon does my shipping. Amazon does my returns. Amazon does my customer support.
It hosts my infrastructure.
It does everything. And so you as a DApp, you don't offer me none of this stuff. Why would I use you, right? And so I think dApps have some interesting use cases, like public-facing utility platforms. So like a decentralized Wikipedia, right, that helps everybody.
Right.
Or like a decentralized social media platform, not controlled by anybody.
Like a Reddit or something.
Like stuff like that that's public-facing, like a public common goods.
Right.
That's where I see kind of much more use cases for it, and it's actually more beneficial for everybody as a whole.
For me, what I can kind of imply from, let's say, taking the smart contract functionality and the decentralized application functionality, and I marry these two things together, and arguably I could create an autonomous company or business that may have minimal to zero humans working for it. And the example that I like to use, because it's very, it's all e-commerce based, would be registering domain names and web hosting. They don't really need people to run that business. That process has been nailed down for 25 years. It just seems like this is a very practical process that you could apply replace with a smart contract. So how does that kind of fit into maybe your long-term vision of dApps? Might that be an evolution?
Yeah, there's companies like Aragon who are trying to work on this,
right,
where you're trying to figure out creating decentralized organizations and governance. Like, at the end of the day, it goes back to what is the governance mechanisms, what are the security mechanisms in this? What problem are you actually trying to solve? Do you actually need a blockchain for this?
Right.
And finally, is like, if you do, and the problems you're trying to solve make sense for this, is it at least 100x more beneficial as opposed to other solutions? Because if it's not 100x, I'm just going to go to the easier solution and get 20x.
Right.
Why am I going to use this blockchain or dApp?
It kind of reminds me of cloud.
Yes.
So, when that became a major buzzword, less than a decade ago, I need cloud. Oh, my business is in the cloud. It seems like some of the same
But
stuff.
I think the DAOs are here to stay.
The DAOs are here.
And a lot of people will continue experimenting with them, and we're going to see many different iterations from many different blockchains, and we're still really, really early in the space.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. So as we kind of wrap up here, let's just talk about a few more things. What would you say are some problems or challenges that currently face Ethereum right now that maybe address its scalability issues or its governance model or anything like that?
I would say scalability. Like
and that's really a technical problem.
It's a network issue, it's a technical issue, and it's a security issue.
Okay.
And what they're trying to do to scale is trying to create a new consensus model, proof of stake, but their own variation of it. I won't get into it, but it's never been done before. It's very experimental, and I'm not too sure when they're planning to launch that. It's going to be kind of like a soft launch. They slowly roll it out. But that's the biggest issue right now. Every blockchain out there has this problem.
Well, that was excellent, Amir. We're going to wrap up now with our rapid fire question session for our newbie. So we'll start with that and see how she does.
All right.
So now it comes time for our rapid fire questions round. I'm going to ask Steph some quick questions on what we talked about and see if she was actually paying attention. So are you ready, Steph?
I think so.
All right, Steph. So what is Ethereum?
Ethereum is a distributed global computer for smart contracts and decentralized apps.
Excellent. Who invented Ethereum?
A brilliant mathematician and programmer named Vitalik Buterin.
I think we'll leave it there, as the breadth and depth of our technical discussion was pretty high. But I think that really gives you a basic understanding about just kind of understanding where this fits into the big picture. And very well done.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for educating me.
So today we talked about what Ethereum is, where it came from, and how it can be used.
That was a great 101 on Ethereum. I now understand that Ethereum is a distributed global computer, and this computing power can be used to facilitate smart contracts and decentralized application ecosystems.
I think we're going to have to thank our special guest today for teaching us about the basics. So thank you, Amir. It was a pleasure to speak with you.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to School of Block, a Canadian blockchain, Bitcoin, and cryptocurrency podcast that breaks it all down for newbies.
I'm Adam, your host.
And I'm Steph, your newbie.
Join us next time on School of Block for another episode about blockchain and cryptocurrencies. Until next time, signing off.